I am Hank. I have been living in Texas my whole life, and what I am about to tell you still gives me nightmares. It all started when I purchased a 90-acre ranch and began grazing my prized cows on the land. I bought this property in 1999. I was surprised at the price tag and what I was getting with the 90 acres. I was happy to have found it because I had been looking for a large piece of land for my cattle. The property consisted of a big, beautiful ranch home with 3 barns for the horses, 4 small cabins for the ranch hands, and a river running through the open fields coming from the stunning mountain ridge that the land backed up to. I couldn't believe that I had stumbled upon this property. It was perfect for what I needed and was looking for. The only downside was that I had to relocate to another part of the state that I was not familiar with and away from my family's business, where I had started my own business with my prized cattle. I met with the owners of the property at the realtor's office in a small town about 30 minutes away from the ranch. After filing the papers and switching the deed, I asked the couple as to why they were selling the property at the discounted price and why they were moving. I watched as their faces dropped from a smiling expression to a somber look as they glanced at each other. We want to get out of the ranch business and downsize to a smaller place. We are retiring, and we no longer need the property and all the work that is involved in keeping up the place, I was told by the gentleman with a slight tremble in his voice. I took that answer at face value and didn't ask any more questions. I was getting the deal of a lifetime, and I did not want to mess anything up. I was ready to call the ranch my home. After purchasing the property came the big challenge of moving in. Do not get me wrong, I had lots of help from Cow Boss and all the hired ranch hands that made the trip run smoothly. After we had all moved and settled in, we started working on the ranch. We were surprised at the layout of the land, which made our jobs easier, and we all wanted to celebrate the new working ranch. We had friends and family who had traveled from all parts of the great state of Texas to celebrate with us. We had plenty of room for all the guests to stay there comfortably. From the main ranch house to the barn and the 4 ranch handhouses that were on the property, we made sure that our guests were happy and taken care of. We even made beds in the upper lofts of the barns for the older children, teenage boys, to sleep in. It was a celebration of the century, and we had lived it up that night. The next morning, as we were meeting in the main house, hungover and all, I noticed that most of the older children were missing. I went to the barn where they were bunked to see if they were still asleep. As I climbed the ladder to the loft, I heard whispering. When I reached the top, I startled the boys, and some let out a scream. As I stood up in the loft, I saw that all the teenage boys were huddled into the far corner of the barn. I let out a laugh and thought that these city boys were not used to sleeping in a barn. They told me what they had heard in the middle of the night. Something or someone had come into the barn. It had spooked the horses. They proceeded to tell me about the screams that came from the wooded area close to the barn. I thought that maybe one of my employees wanted to scare them. Little did I know, that was the beginning of the nightmare that took place at the ranch that I called home. A few weeks after the guests had left and gone on their way, my employees and I were left to work the ranch. I was in the office on the main floor of the ranch house when my longtime trusted friend and employee, Billy, came in and knocked on the open door to the office. He had a concerned expression planted on his face, and I knew that whatever news he had for me would not be good. He came into the office, and we chatted for a little while. He filled me in on everything around the ranch, and it seemed to me that everything was running smoothly. That is when he started to tell me that some of the ranch hands were getting anxious and did not want to go into the wooded areas of the property. He said that at night, when they go check on the cattle in the fields, they hear strange screams coming from the thick woods. He said it scares the cows, and they run them down and round them up into the fenced areas of the property. I thought that what Billy was telling me seemed strange, for I knew that the men that I had employed were experienced and strong men. I did not think that they would scare easily. It was time for a meeting with them and get to the bottom of this. I did not want any of them to quit on me. We have been together for a very long time, and I thought of them as family. Sitting in the meeting, I could feel the tension in the room. No one wanted to say that anything was out of the norm at the ranch, but I could feel that something was missing. Finally, when I dismissed the men to go back to work, I heard a deep voice rise and say, "I saw it last night." The room fell silent. Every eye in the room turned toward Tommy. Tom was a big, burly man that was as honest as a man could be. He also demanded respect due to him being a hoss, and no one would want to cross him. When he talked, everyone listened. At first, he didn't want to tell his story, but when others in the room started to tell their experiences and what they had witnessed, he loosened up and started to tell us what he had seen. At first, I thought it was a big bear walking across the field, but when I made a noise, and it noticed me, it took off running fast into the woods and not on 4 legs. It was running on 2 legs and crashed into the woods, making a lot of noise. It wasn't a bear. I don't know what it was. Tommy had worked for me for the last 8 years before I purchased the ranch. I knew him well, and I knew he did not tell tall tales. We all believed what he was telling us. He also lived in Last Cabin, which was the closest to the wooded area of the fields. It was the largest cabin. He wanted the privacy that the cabin provided. However, during the meeting, he suggested that he wanted a roommate. We all had a good chuckle at his request. We didn't know at the time how serious the problem we had on our hands. That night, as I was ready for bed, I started to hear something strange coming from the bedroom window. The only way that I can explain it was a loud scream. It started out as a low, guttural growl. It then went up to a long howl, and then back down to a growl as it echoed through the valley, as if hitting the mountains that rose from the back of the property. As I started to lay back down in my bed, the doorbell started to ring. I get up and opened the door to Billy. He told me the cattle were spooked, and the men were trying to round them up, and he asked me if I had heard the screams coming from the woods. I told him that I did hear something, but didn't know what it was. I got dressed and went out to join the men in rounding up the cattle. As I started to ride my horse out into the dark open field, I began to approach the woods and heard something moving inside the thick brush. I thought that one of the cows was in it and was hiding from us, trying to stay safe there. As I got closer, I turned on my flashlight and pointed it toward the noise. It was at this time that a huge black creature stepped out into the open, right in the beam of my flashlight. It is hard to describe it, but it stood about 8 feet tall with dark hair that covered the whole body, with massive shoulders and chest. The head was coned, and the face was ape-like, and I could hear it breathing. In a blink of an eye, my horse was spooked, and before I could grab the reins, he bucked. I fell to the ground and watched in horror as my horse ran off, leaving me on the ground with this creature about 20 feet away from me. I scrambled to my feet and turned toward the woods where the massive creature stood. My heart was beating hard, and my hands started to shake. I thought I was staring death in the face. When our eyes met, I was paralyzed and could not move. It felt as if I was frozen in place for hours when suddenly I heard a gunshot echo through the fields, and the creature looked away from me. Then I heard the men on their horses coming toward me and yelling my name. The Bigfoot creature let out a low growl, turned around, and crashed through the woods, breaking everything in its path. By the time the men reached me, I was in full shock. My whole body was shaking, and I could hardly stand. Billy helped me onto one of the horses, and they led me to the house. After I arrived home and calmed down, I told them what I had seen, and that the legendary Bigfoot was real and roaming the woods of the property. The ranch hands were not too keen on hearing about a creature that none of us believed in, and it is roaming around where we all worked and lived. However, they knew that something was out in those woods, scaring and targeting the livestock. We knew that we had to be careful going out into the fields without being armed. I requested that no one should go out too far without someone accompanying them. I had no complaints from any of them. After that night, the activity around the ranch continued to get worse. Just about every night, I would hear gunshots ring through the night air as one or more employees would try to scare it away after hearing or seeing the creature. At first, I would jump out of bed, grabbing my weapon to go see what was happening. But after a while, I became used to the sounds of the gunshots and came to expect it. Some nights, Tommy would go shoot up in the air thinking that would scare the creature off. It may have worked in the beginning, but doing that night after night, I think that the Bigfoot was used to it. That did not keep it away for long. Night after night, I would hear strange noises around the main house, and the men would tell me the strange happenings were getting worse around their cabin. From rocks being thrown into the windows, to loud screams coming ever so close, and large footprints around their front doors. My employees were not getting any rest at night, and it was reflecting on their jobs. We all were suffering from lack of sleep, and tolerated it for a while, but when the creature started attacking the cattle, which was our profits from the ranch, we knew we had to do something to stop this thing from killing any more livestock. One morning, I called a meeting. We all knew that something had to be done about our visitor from the woods. We could not just sit back and watch the Bigfoot kill and feast on the prized cattle we had worked so hard to protect. We had lost 5 cows and knew something had to give. We concluded that we had to track this creature down and try to steer it away from the ranch in any viable way. That afternoon, we started to saddle the horses and get the gear rounded up to go riding around the 90-acre ranch. We also connected with other people who were willing to help us with this hunt. In all, there were around 25 men on horseback riding into the fields. Tommy and another ranch hand stayed back at the ranch to protect the livestock. When we rode out from the main house, we decided to split into doubles to cover more ground. It was getting later in the day, and we needed to cover as much land as possible. I picked Billy to be my partner. Even though I had trust in all my employees, Billy had been with me for the longest time, and I knew that he would have my back in any situation. He was also my friend, and we made a good team. Billy and I decided that we would ride toward the mountain ridge, where the rolling hills were the tallest, giving us the best viewing point to see a greater amount of land. We could see a great distance of the surrounding areas of the ranch. And what a view it was! As I dismounted my horse, I looked around in awe at the amount of land I could see. The view was amazing. As I looked over the span of the ranch and the main house, I couldn't believe that I owned such an amazing piece of paradise. But soon, I came back to reality and remembered why we were up here. I took my binoculars out and started to scan the valley to see if I could spot anything out of the ordinary. I could see the men on horseback riding around the massive, wide open fields, dodging the small trees that were scattered throughout. I was scanning the valley through the binoculars, watching the men hunt for the elusive creature, when suddenly a very powerful and overwhelming stench came over Billy and me. "Do you smell that?" Billy asked, as we both turned around to see where the smell was emanating from. The stench was so bad I was ready to throw up. As I slowly put the binoculars up to my eyes, I looked through them, and suddenly a rock came crashing down and landed right beside Billy. When I looked up to where the huge rock had been launched, I saw a figure standing about 40 yards away from us. I slowly and cautiously brought my shotgun up and aimed at the creature with my finger on the trigger. I noticed that Billy had done the same. The creature was standing in the open, staring at us, and swaying slightly from side to side. As I watched through my scope, I noticed that its face looked more human than animal, and I started to have doubts about pulling the trigger. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," Billy stated, with his finger on the trigger of his high-powered rifle. "Don't shoot," I said in a low tone, as I continued looking through the scope at the creature staring back at us with a slight snarl on its lips. Billy and I watched, as it slowly turned and started to walk away from us, and disappeared into the woods. "What do we do now?" Billy asked. "I don't know," I replied. "Gather the men and meet at the main house," I responded. It was dark when we all gathered in the office of the main ranch house. I could see the men were concerned by the looks on their faces, and I proceeded to tell them about Billy's and my encounter with the creature and attempted to explain why we did not shoot at it. Afterwards, I was not expecting to hear what Tommy and the other ranch hands shared about their encounter, as they were protecting the cattle back at the ranch. We were sitting on the wooden fence facing the pasture in the direction of the path you took. We were talking and scanning the fields for anything unusual when we both saw two dark creatures running across the field and into the woods. At first, we thought it was two people in dark clothing, but as we watched, we could see that they were covered in hair, not clothes, and one was smaller than the other. It looked to be a child from where I was sitting, Tommy explained. You didn't go after it? Responded someone in the crowded room. No, we were there to protect the cattle, not run into the woods after something I couldn't catch up to, even if I wanted to, Tommy said as he looked my way. I was stunned. Really stunned. Did I have a family of Bigfoots that lived in the woods of my property? The answer to that question came about a week later when one of my employees happened to stumble upon 3 Bigfoot creatures. He explained what he saw that night as a male, a female with feminine features, and a smaller creature. I began to wonder if there were more than just the 3 lurking around in those woods. Throughout that year, there were so many more encounters that it would take me hours to tell. It became so bad that my employees started to quit on me, and I continued to lose more of my cattle. We could not suffice the creatures by putting food in the back of the property to lure them away from the ranch and the livestock. We tried everything to keep the ranch running smoothly and to protect the animals as well as my employees. However, when I had little help and no one wanted to work at the ranch, I was in a bad place. I would hire men to work for me at good pay, but as soon as something happened that they couldn't explain, they would quit. After a while, there was no one coming for a job. I had put everything into this ranch, and I was drowning in deep debt and could not even begin to dig myself out of it. Unfortunately, I went belly up and had to sell the ranch. I returned to the family business and started a new adventure in my own business. I am back up and running as I was before, but I will never forget about the experiences that I had at the beautiful ranch, for my nightmares keep them alive.